Bank humiliates old black man, unknowing his son was about to invest $5 billion the same day. Walter Johnson held the crumpled brown envelope tightly, his hands trembling not from nervousness, but from a lifetime of indignation built over 42 years of working as a janitor in that very building in New York City. The bank where he had spent half his life cleaning hallways and restrooms treated him as if he were invisible. And today he would discover that this invisibility came at a price he never imagined. The manager, Brandon Miller, recognized him immediately when Walter approached the premium service counter. The 32-year-old executive grimaced in disdain at the sight of the 70-year-old man wearing his best dress shirt, now faded with time, clutching that envelope as if it held a treasure. "Sir, retiree services are handled at the ATMs," Brandon said loudly, making sure everyone in the branch heard. "This counter is for special clients only." Walter took a deep breath. He had known that tone for decades, the same one executives used when they walked past him in the hallways, as if he were part of the furniture. "Young man, I need to make an important deposit. It's regarding the settlement for my patents," Walter said, keeping his voice calm but firm. Brandon burst into laughter, the sound echoing through the branch. Other employees turned to watch, some curious, others uncomfortable. "Patents? You who spent your whole life pushing a mop bucket have patents." Brandon made sure to speak loudly. "Sir, for God's sake, don't waste my time with fantasies." The receptionist, Deborah, a 50-year-old woman who had always greeted Walter with respect during his years of work, tried to intervene discreetly. "Brandon, maybe we should hear what Mr. Johnson has to say." "Deborah, you don't call the shots here," Brandon cut her off sharply. "Mr. Johnson, either use the ATM or leave. I have important clients to attend to." A line had formed behind Walter. An elegant gray-haired woman discreetly pulled out her phone and began recording the scene. Others whispered among themselves, some clearly disturbed by what they were witnessing. Walter looked around at the familiar faces. 42 years of cleaning this place. He knew every corner, every long-time employee, every executive who had ever worked there. He knew the schedules, the routines, the secrets he had unintentionally overheard during decades of silent labor. "Young man, I insist on making this deposit." Walter raised the envelope. "It's the first installment of the settlement, $300,000. Silence fell over the branch like a stone dropped in water. Brandon stared at the envelope in disbelief, then at Walter's composed face. $300,000. "Sir, stop this ridiculous charade." Brandon yanked the envelope from Walter's hands violently. "I'll show everyone the fantasy you're spinning." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Brandon tore open the envelope in front of everyone and dumped its contents onto the counter. Bills of various denominations spilled out, some crisp and new, others old and worn. His mocking expression faltered for a moment when he saw the amount of money, but he quickly regained his composure. "Look at this." Brandon held up a few bills. "You brought your life savings and expect us to believe it's $300,000. He began counting the money dramatically, making sarcastic remarks about each old bill he found. "This one must be from when you first started working," Brandon said, holding up a particularly worn bill. "And this one, wow, what a relic." Note: the embedded call to action for likes and subscriptions was preserved as it was part of the original text's stylistic choice. The people in line shifted uncomfortably. The woman recording moved closer, making sure every word was captured. Deborah, the receptionist, covered her face with her hands, clearly embarrassed by the situation. "Take a look, everyone," Brandon continued his cruel performance. "This isn't even close to 300,000, maybe 15, 20,000 at most. And you want us to believe you hold patents." The agency's security guard, a large man named Carl, stepped forward at Brandon's command. Carl had known Walter for years and was visibly uncomfortable. "Carl, please escort this gentleman to the exit," Brandon ordered. "And next time, use the ATMs like any normal retiree." That's when Walter spoke, his voice echoing through the agency with a calm that sent chills down Brandon's spine. "I developed those patents during the 42 years I cleaned this building," Walter said, staring directly into the manager's eyes. "While you all worked, I watched." While you held meetings, I listened. While you threw away papers, I studied. The agency fell completely silent. Brandon blinked several times, as if he hadn't understood what he'd just heard. "What are you talking about?" Brandon asked, his voice losing some of its arrogance. "Banking security technology, fraud prevention systems, and automated service protocols," Walter recited, as if reading from a manual. 3 patents registered with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, sold yesterday to a consortium of European banks for $1,200,000, paid in 4 installments. The world seemed to stop around Brandon. He looked at the bills scattered on the counter, then at Walter's calm face, trying to process the information. That's impossible," Brandon stammered. "Brandon, a janitor can't..." A janitor who spent 4 decades observing how this bank works, listening to security problem discussions, seeing the system's flaws day after day, Walter interrupted. A janitor who studied at night for 20 years to understand what he saw during the day. Brandon's assistant, a young woman named Jennifer, had discreetly checked the banking system during the argument. Her face paled when she saw Walter Johnson's details on the computer screen. With trembling hands, she motioned to Brandon. "Mr. Brandon," Jennifer whispered, loud enough for others to hear, "I need to speak with you urgently." Brandon approached the screen, still in shock. Jennifer pointed to the information displayed under Walter's full name. "Mr. Brandon, the last name Johnson. It's the same as the investor scheduled for a meeting at 3 this afternoon," Jennifer said, her voice shaking. "The same one signing the $5 billion contract." Brandon's blood ran cold. At 3 o'clock was the most important meeting in the agency's history. A mysterious investor, who had built a tech empire from scratch, had chosen this bank for his biggest investment. The last name was Johnson, but Brandon had never made the connection. "It can't be a coincidence," Brandon muttered, looking at Walter, who observed everything with a serene, almost melancholic expression. "It's not a coincidence," said a woman's voice at the agency's entrance. Everyone turned to see a 45-year-old woman in a white lab coat walking in with firm steps. Dr. Sarah Johnson, a respected cardiologist throughout New York City, scanned the room before spotting her father. "Dad, what's going on here?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the agency pay attention. Walter smiled for the first time since entering the agency. "Hi, sweetheart. I was trying to make a deposit, but there seems to be some confusion about who I am," said Walter, his voice heavy with deep sadness. Sarah looked at the money scattered on the counter, at the crumpled envelope in Brandon's hands, and finally at the manager's embarrassed face. "Confusion about who he is?" Sarah repeated, her voice rising a notch. "Do you know who you're talking to?" Brandon tried to compose himself, nervously adjusting his tie. "Doctor, there's been a misunderstanding. Your father, he was making some claims about patents and..." "Claims?" Sarah interrupted. "The patents my father developed were sold yesterday for over $1 million. He came here to deposit the first installment, as any customer has the right to do." The murmur in the bank grew louder. The woman filming everything moved closer, capturing every word of the conversation. Other customers pulled out their phones, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Brandon tried to explain, but Sarah wasn't finished. "More importantly," she continued, pulling out her phone, "I'm calling my brother right now to tell him how our father was treated here today." "Your brother?" Brandon asked, a terrible feeling growing in his stomach. "Robert Johnson, CEO of Johnson Tech," Sarah dialed a number, "the one who has a meeting here in 2 hours to sign a $5 billion contract." The world crashed down on Brandon. $5 billion, the biggest investment in the bank's history, and he had just humiliated the investor's father in front of dozens of people. "Robert?" Sarah spoke into the phone, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's me. I'm at the bank where you're investing today. Dad is being humiliated by the manager." "Yes, that very bank." Brandon tried to step closer, making desperate gestures. "Doctor, please, let me explain." Sarah raised her hand, silencing him. "No, Robert, it wasn't a misunderstanding," she continued on the phone. "The manager called Dad delusional, spread his money on the counter to humiliate him in front of everyone, and ordered security to remove him. The silence in the bank was deafening. Brandon felt sweat running down his back, his entire career crumbling before his eyes. "I understand," Sarah said into the phone. 15 minutes, don't worry, we won't leave." She hung up and looked at Brandon with an expression that would chill anyone's blood. "My brother asked for 15 minutes before we make any decisions," Sarah said. "I suggest you use those 15 minutes for reflection." That's when a 50-year-old man in an expensive suit appeared in the bank, whom Brandon recognized immediately, the regional manager, Richard Thompson. His face was red with anger and embarrassment. "Brandon!" Richard shouted as he crossed the bank. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" "Mr. Thompson, I can explain." "Explain," Richard cut him off. "The footage of this humiliation is already circulating on social media. The bank is trending on Twitter in 15 minutes. Brandon looked around and saw several people filming and typing on their phones. The situation had spiraled completely out of control. Richard approached Walter and Sarah, trying to salvage the situation. "Mr. Johnson, Dr. Sarah, on behalf of the bank, I'd like to offer our sincerest apologies," Richard said, his voice trembling. "This behavior is unacceptable and does not represent our institution's values." Walter looked at him for a long moment before responding. "Mr. Thompson, for 42 years, I cleaned this building," Walter said, his voice heavy with decades of hurt. 42 years walking these halls invisible. You didn't even know my full name until today." "Mr. Johnson, please, allow me to offer a private room to resolve this situation properly," Richard pleaded. "No," Walter said firmly. "If I was humiliated here in front of everyone, this is where I want to resolve it." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Sarah watched her father with pride. Even at 70 years old, even after decades of being treated as invisible, Walter kept his dignity intact. "Dad worked here during the day and studied at night," Sarah said, looking around at everyone in the agency. While cleaning the meeting rooms, he overheard executives discussing security issues they couldn't solve. At home, he studied and developed solutions. "For 20 years, he did this," Sarah continued, "studying systems engineering at night, taking online courses, learning about banking technology, all while supporting our family on a janitor's salary." Walter nodded slowly. "I saw the flaws in the system every day," he said. "I saw how criminals bypassed security, how customers fell victim to fraud, how service could be improved. So I'd go home and study how to fix these problems." Brandon, who had stayed silent, finally found his voice. "But why didn't you ever say anything? Why didn't you suggest these solutions?" Walter looked at him with deep sadness. "To whom?" he asked. "Who would listen to a 60-year-old black janitor trying to give advice on banking technology?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Brandon lowered his eyes, unable to respond. "So he filed the patents himself," Sarah went on. "Spent his savings on registration, worked with specialized lawyers, proved his solutions worked. And yesterday he finally sold everything for over $1 million. Richard Thompson broke into a cold sweat, mentally calculating the scale of the disaster. This wasn't just about the 15 minutes Robert Johnson had asked for. It was about the bank's reputation, the viral video, the largest investment in the agency's history about to be cancelled. "Mr. Johnson," Richard tried again, "how about we offer you a special account with all the benefits of a premium client?" "Special account?" Walter repeated. "Mr. Thompson, in 42 years working here, I've never even had a basic account at this bank." The revelation hit like a bombshell. Richard turned pale. "What do you mean?" "My paycheck was always deposited at another bank," Walter explained. "You never cared to offer me banking services. I was just the janitor." That's impossible," Richard stammered. "All employees are entitled..." "Entitled to what was never offered," Sarah interrupted. "Dad got paid elsewhere because here he was treated like he didn't exist." Just then, the agency doors opened, and a 40-year-old man walked in quietly, dressed in a simple but well-tailored suit. His temples were lightly streaked with gray, and he carried a brown leather briefcase. The man glanced around, The crowd, the phone cameras, the money still scattered on the counter. His eyes finally found Walter, and his face lit up with a warm smile. "Dad," the man said, walking toward Walter. Walter turned, his eyes filling with tears at the sight of his son. "Robert," he murmured, "you didn't have to come." "Of course I did," Robert said, hugging his father tightly. "No one humiliates my dad." Brandon watched the scene with growing horror. That unassuming man who could easily go unnoticed on the street was Robert Johnson, the billionaire CEO whose meeting was scheduled in an hour. "Robert Johnson," Richard approached, trying to maintain his composure. "Mr. Johnson, what a pleasure to see you. You're early for our meeting." Robert stepped back from his father's embrace and looked at Richard with an icy expression. "Richard Thompson, isn't it?" Robert said. "Unfortunately, the meeting has been cancelled." "Cancelled?" Richard repeated, panic creeping into his voice. "Mr. Johnson, perhaps we can talk about the misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Robert interrupted. "I saw the video in the car on my way here. I saw how my father was treated. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's a lack of character." The agency fell into absolute silence. The sound of cell phone cameras recording everything seemed amplified in the tense atmosphere. "Mr. Johnson," Richard pleaded, "please, let's talk in private. I'm sure we can reach an agreement." "Agreement?" Robert glanced around the agency. "My father spent 42 years of his life building this place, cleaning every corner, knowing every employee, dedicating his life so you could work in a clean, organized environment." "And how did you treat him today?" Robert continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Like a nuisance, like someone who doesn't deserve respect or dignity." Brandon tried to step forward, but Robert ignored him completely. "Dad, tell them how you managed to develop the patents," Robert said, placing a hand on Walter's shoulder. Walter took a deep breath, looking around the agency, where he'd spent most of his adult life. "In 1981, I started working here as a janitor," Walter said. "I was 28, with one dream, to give my children a college education. During the day, I cleaned offices and listened to executives discussing problems they couldn't solve." Walter continued. "At night, I studied. First high school, which I hadn't finished in my youth. Then technical courses." Sarah moved closer to her father, holding his hand. "Dad always came home late, exhausted, but still sat at the kitchen table to study," she said. "Robert and I did our homework alongside him." "In the 90s, when the internet arrived, I started taking online courses," Walter went on. "I learned about systems, programming, digital security. Everything I overheard during the day at the bank, I studied at home at night." Robert smiled proudly. "I remember waking up in the early hours and seeing Dad still studying at the kitchen table," he said. "When I asked why he studied so hard, he always gave the same answer." "What did he say?" asked Deborah, the receptionist who had known Walter for so many years. "Knowledge is the only inheritance no one can steal from you," Robert and Sarah said together. Walter nodded, his eyes glistening. "While I cleaned meeting rooms, I heard executives complaining about fraud, slow systems, poor service," Walter explained. "So I'd go home and think of solutions." "Why didn't you ever suggest them?" asked Jennifer, Brandon's assistant. "Who would listen?" Walter repeated the question he'd asked earlier. A black janitor suggesting improvements to executives who graduated from top universities. The discomfort in the agency was palpable. Several people lowered their eyes, recognizing the sad truth in Walter's words. "So Dad decided if he couldn't speak, he'd prove himself," Sarah said. In the 2000s, after completing his degree in systems, he began developing the solutions he'd imagined. "A degree?" Brandon asked, surprised. "Graduated with a systems engineering degree from New York University in 2003, Robert said proudly. At 50 years old, after studying 22 years at night. Richard Thompson was in shock. 42 years with an engineer working as a janitor, and they never knew. The 3 patents were developed between 2010 and 2020, Walter continued. Real-time fraud prevention system, intelligent automated service protocol, and biometric security technology for transactions. Dad tested everything in theory first, Sarah explained. Then he got approval to test them in small community banks. The results were impressive. Robert opened his folder and took out some documents. An 89% reduction in fraud, a 78% increase in customer satisfaction, and a 65% decrease in service time, Robert read. These were the test results. Yesterday, a consortium of European banks bought all 3 patents for $1,200,000, Walter said. Money I'll use to create a scholarship fund for workers' children. The silence in the branch was absolute. Even the people filming had stopped to listen to the story. "And you came here to deposit this money in the bank where you worked your whole life," said Deborah, the receptionist, her voice trembling. "I came because, despite everything, this place is part of my story," Walter said. "But today I learned my story was never part of this place." That's when a 60-year-old man appeared at the branch entrance, wearing an expensive suit and an expression of absolute panic. It was the bank's president, Dr. William Peterson, who had rushed over after receiving an urgent call about the situation. "Where is Mr. Johnson?" Dr. Peterson asked, panting. Richard pointed to the group around Walter. Dr. Peterson quickly approached. "Mr. Walter Johnson?" he asked. "I'm William Peterson, the bank's president." Walter looked at him calmly. "President," Walter nodded respectfully. "Mr. Johnson, I came personally to apologize for what happened here today," Dr. Peterson said. "This behavior is unacceptable and does not represent our institution's values." "President," Robert interrupted, "with all due respect, you're too late. Mr. Robert Johnson," Dr. Peterson turned to the CEO. "Please, we need to talk. The investment is cancelled," Robert said firmly. "I would never invest $5 billion in an institution that treats the workers who built it this way." Dr. Peterson paled. $5 billion wasn't just the largest investment in the bank's history. It was its survival in a competitive market. "Mr. Johnson, please," Dr. Peterson begged. "Let me propose a solution. What if we created a special program in honor of your father?" "A special program?" Sarah asked skeptically. "A financial inclusion program for retirees and low-income workers," Dr. Peterson quickly explained. "With your father as the lead consultant?" Robert looked at his father, who remained silent for a long moment. "Dad, the decision is yours," Robert said. Walter looked around the branch. 42 years of his life in that place. He knew every long-time employee, every corner, every story in those walls. "What about Brandon?" Walter asked, looking at the manager who had started the humiliation. "Brandon will be fired immediately," Dr. Peterson said without hesitation. "No," Walter said firmly. "I don't want anyone to lose their job because of me." Everyone looked at Walter in surprise. "Mr. Johnson," Dr. Peterson asked, confused. "You don't want him punished?" "I want him educated," Walter corrected. "Ignorance is also a prison. Brandon needs to learn that every human being deserves respect, no matter their job or what they wear." Brandon, who had remained silent throughout the conversation, approached Walter with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Johnson," Brandon said, his voice trembling, "I don't have the words to apologize. You're being more generous with me than I deserve." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Walter replied, "but it's the only one you'll get." Dr. Peterson breathed a sigh of relief, seeing an opportunity to turn things around. "So, Mr. Robert, can we discuss the investment?" he asked hopefully. Robert looked at his father, who nodded slowly. "Under a few conditions," Robert said. "First, my father will be hired as a senior consultant at the bank, with a salary matching the position." "Agreed," Dr. Peterson said immediately. "Second, the financial inclusion program will be implemented in all bank branches, with my father overseeing it personally," Robert continued. "Also agreed." "Third, every bank employee, from janitors to executives, will undergo training on respect and human dignity," Robert stated. "Agreed." "And fourth," Robert paused, "my father will be the first client of the inclusion program you just created. He'll have a special account with all the benefits, but more importantly, he'll be treated with the respect he's always deserved." Dr. Peterson nodded vigorously. "All conditions are accepted," he said. "Is the investment confirmed?" Robert looked at his father again. Walter took a deep breath and nodded. "The investment is confirmed," Robert announced. The branch erupted in murmurs and comments. Those filming continued capturing everything. knowing they were witnessing something historic. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Dr. Peterson immediately called his assistant to prepare Walter's employment documents and the investment contracts. The branch had transformed into a hub of intense activity. "Deborah," Walter called to the receptionist, who had always greeted him with respect. "Yes, Mr. Johnson?" "You've always been kind to me all these years," Walter said. "I'd like you to be my assistant for the new program." Deborah was moved. "It would be an honor, Mr. Johnson." Brandon approached Walter again. "Mr. Johnson, how can I make up for what I did today?" he asked, genuinely remorseful. "Learn," Walter said simply. "Learn that every job has dignity. Learn that age and appearance don't define a person's worth. Learn that respect isn't a favor, it's a right." "I will learn, sir," Brandon promised, "and I'll dedicate myself to being a better employee." Sarah walked up to her father. "Dad, I'm proud of you," she said. "Not just for the patents or the money, but for how you handled everything today." "Sweetheart, anger and bitterness build nothing," Walter replied. "I'd rather use this situation to build something better for others." Robert smiled at his father. "That's why you've always been my hero," he said. "Not for the wealth you created, but for the character you've always had." Dr. Peterson returned with the documents. "Mr. Johnson, here's your contract as senior consultant," he said, "and here's the paperwork for your special account." Walter took the documents and studied them for a moment. 42 years ago, I walked into this building for the first time," he said. "I never imagined I'd one day sign papers here as a consultant." "Dad always said dreams don't have an expiration date," Sarah remarked. "And he also said, education is the only treasure no one can steal," Robert added. Walter signed the documents under the emotional gazes of everyone in the branch. It was a historic moment. The janitor was becoming a consultant in the very place where he had worked for decades. "Now, about the money you brought today," Dr. Peterson said, looking at the bills still scattered on the counter. "Oh yes," Walter smiled. "You can count it. It's exactly $300,000, as I said." Brandon, who had counted the money the first time with disdain, now approached respectfully. "Mr. Johnson, may I count it again to confirm?" he asked. "Of course, Brandon." Walter nodded. This time Brandon counted the bills carefully and with respect. When he finished, his face was red with shame. "Exactly $300,000, he confirmed. "Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry." "It's all right," Walter said. "Now you know not to judge by appearances." The crowd in the agency began to disperse, but many people approached Walter to greet and congratulate him. The story was already spreading on social media as an example of determination and dignity. A week later, Walter returned to the bank for his first day as a consultant. This time, he was welcomed with a red carpet and a special reception. Employees of all ranks came to greet him, but Walter made sure to enter through the same service door he had used for 42 years. "Why did Daddy go in that way?" Sarah asked Robert, who had come to accompany his father's first day. "Because he wants to remind everyone that it doesn't matter which door you enter," Robert explained. "What matters is the dignity with which you walk." In his first month as a consultant, Walter implemented changes that revolutionized the bank's customer service. The financial inclusion program was so successful that other banks began seeking him out to implement similar systems. Brandon, who had undergone training in respect and human dignity, became one of the most considerate employees in the agency. He made sure to treat every client, regardless of age or appearance, with the same respect he would give a director. "Mr. Johnson," Brandon said to Walter one day, "thank you for giving me a second chance." "Brandon, everyone deserves an opportunity to be better," Walter replied. "What's important is not to waste that opportunity." Deborah adapted perfectly to her role as Walter's assistant. Together, they created a customer service protocol that became a model for other banks across the country. "Mr. Johnson," Deborah said one day, "you've transformed this place." "No, Deborah," Walter corrected. "We transformed this place. Change only happens when we work together." The financial inclusion program served over 10,000 people in its first year. Retirees, low-income workers, students, and small business owners found in the bank a place where they were treated with dignity and respect. Dr. Peterson, who had initially accepted Robert's conditions just to save the investment, discovered that the changes Walter implemented had made the bank more profitable and respected. "Mr. Johnson," Dr. Peterson said at a board meeting, "your programs have increased our client base by 40% and our satisfaction ratings by 85%. How did you achieve this?" "Dr. Peterson," Walter replied, "when you treat people with respect, they trust you. And trust is the foundation of any banking business." Robert kept his investment promise, and the bank became one of the most innovative and respected in the country. But more important than financial success was the cultural transformation that took place. "Dad," Robert said during a visit to the bank, "you achieved in 1 year what many companies fail to do in decades." "What did I achieve?" Walter asked. "Creating a culture of genuine respect," Robert explained, "where a person's worth isn't measured by their job title or how much money they have." Sarah, who often visited her father at work, was moved to see the transformation of the environment. "Daddy," she said one day, "remember when you told me knowledge was the only inheritance no one could steal from us?" "I do," Walter smiled. "Now I understand you left us an even greater legacy," Sarah continued. "You taught us that dignity and respect are values we must carry wherever we go." Walter's patents continued to be implemented in banks worldwide, but he always said his greatest creation wasn't the technologies he developed, but the example that it's never too late to achieve dreams and that every honest job deserves respect. A year after that day of humiliation, the bank organized a special event to celebrate the success of the financial inclusion program. Walter was invited to be the keynote speaker. "A year ago," Walter told an audience of hundreds, "I walked into this bank carrying an envelope with $300,000 and was treated as if I were worthless. Today, I've learned my worth was never in the money I carried. My worth was always in how I treated people, the dedication I put into my work, and the dreams I never gave up on. The lesson I learned wasn't about wealth or success," Walter said. "It was about dignity. Every human being, regardless of age, color, profession, or bank balance, deserves to be treated with respect." The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Tears streamed down many faces, including Brandon's, who had become one of the most beloved employees at the branch. After the event, Walter went home with Sarah and Robert. Over dinner, they talked about the special day. "Dad," Robert said, "are you happy with everything that's happened?" Walter thought for a moment before answering. "Oh, you know, son, happiness isn't about being recognized or making money. Happiness is knowing I used my experience to help others be treated with dignity." "And what would you do differently if you could go back in time?" Sarah asked. "Nothing," Walter replied without hesitation. "Every humiliation I endured, every time I was ignored, every night I studied tired after work, it all prepared me for this moment. If I hadn't gone through all that, I might not have the sensitivity to understand what others endure. Pain teaches empathy, and empathy makes us better humans." Robert and Sarah exchanged emotional glances. Their father had turned decades of injustice into wisdom, bitterness into compassion, and suffering into strength to help others. "Daddy," Sarah said, "you're the wisest person I know." "Wisdom doesn't come from books, my dear," Walter replied. "It comes from living, from suffering, from persisting, and from never losing faith in people's goodness." A few months later, Walter received a special invitation. A university wanted him to give a lecture to business students about leadership and human dignity. "Professor Johnson," said the university dean, "your management methods based on respect and inclusion have become a national reference." "I'm no professor," Walter corrected. "I'm just a man who learned that true success lies in lifting others up." Walter's lecture at the university was streamed live online and watched by thousands. His simple yet powerful message touched hearts across the country. "Young people," Walter told the students, "you'll leave here with valuable degrees and incredible opportunities. But always remember, knowledge without humility is useless, and power without compassion is dangerous. Treat every person you meet with the same respect you'd like to receive," he continued. Because you never know which janitor might be a genius, which cleaner might have wisdom to share, or which doorman might have stories that could change your lives. After the talk, dozens of students approached Walter to ask questions and seek advice. He spoke with each one, showing the same interest and respect he would give any executive. "Mr. Johnson," asked a young student, "how did you manage to forgive those who humiliated you?" "Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting," Walter explained. "It means choosing not to let anger consume your heart. When you forgive, you free yourself to build something better." "And what if someone says your dreams are impossible?" asked another student. "Then you work in silence and prove them wrong with results," Walter replied. "Dreams don't need an audience to come true. They need dedication." Back at the bank, Walter continued his work as a consultant, but now also served as an informal mentor to younger employees. He made a point of having lunch with cleaning staff, chatting with security guards, and learning each employee's story. "Mr. Johnson," said a young intern, "why do you care so much about the lives of the employees?" "Because everyone has a unique story," Walter explained. "And when you know people's stories, you understand their motivations, their dreams, their struggles. That makes you a better leader." Brandon, who had become one of Walter's protégés, grew professionally and was promoted to regional manager. On his first day in the new role, he sought out Walter to thank him. "Mr. Johnson," Brandon said, "everything I've learned about leadership, I learned from you." "Brandon, you learned from me the same thing I learned from life," Walter replied. "That respect is the foundation of any lasting relationship." "How can I repay you for everything you've done for me?" Brandon asked. "By treating every employee under your care with the same dignity you'd want for yourself," Walter said. "And by teaching others to do the same. That's how the chain of kindness continues." Walter's financial inclusion program expanded to other states and became public policy in several cities. His name became associated not just with technological patents, but above all with the humanitarian revolution he brought to the banking sector. "Dad," Robert said during one of his regular visits to the bank, "you've become a national figure in corporate humanization." "I didn't do anything extraordinary," Walter replied. "I just reminded people of something they already knew, that everyone deserves respect." "But not everyone can turn pain into wisdom the way you have," Robert observed. "Son, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional," Walter explained. "You can choose to be a victim of the injustices you've faced, or you can choose to teach the lessons you've learned." Dr. Peterson, who had initially seen Walter only as a solution to save the investment, developed genuine admiration for the consultant. "Mr. Johnson," Dr. Peterson said one day, "in 30 years of banking, I've never seen anyone transform a company the way you've transformed ours." "Dr. Peterson, I didn't transform the company," Walter corrected. "I just reminded it of the values it already had but had forgotten." "And what are those values?" Dr. Peterson asked. "Simplicity. Treating every customer as a person, not a number," Walter explained. "Humility. Recognizing that every employee contributes to the company's success. And humanity. Understanding that behind every bank account is a life story." The stories of transformation at the bank multiplied. Employees who were once unmotivated began working with greater dedication. Clients who felt like just numbers started to feel valued. Staff turnover decreased dramatically. "How would you explain this miracle?" asked a journalist who came to do a story on the bank. "It's not a miracle," Walter replied. "It's just the natural result of treating people like people. When you plant respect, you harvest loyalty. When you plant dignity, you harvest dedication." Sarah continued to closely follow her father's journey and was amazed by his ability to inspire positive change everywhere he went. "Dad," she said, "have you ever thought about writing a book about your experiences?" "What for?" Walter asked. "The best way to teach is by example. If my actions inspire people, that's worth more than any book." "But a book could carry your message to people who will never meet you in person," Sarah insisted. Walter considered the suggestion for a few days before agreeing. With Sarah and Robert's help, he began writing his memoirs, focusing not on the technical aspects of his inventions, but on the human journey that brought him there. The book, Dignity Can't Be Bought, It's Earned, became a national bestseller. Walter donated all royalties to the scholarship fund he had created. "Mr. Johnson," a reporter asked during the book launch, "what's the main message you want to share?" "That age is no barrier to dreaming, that origin doesn't determine destiny, and that respect is the most valuable currency there is," Walter replied. "And for people facing humiliation and disrespect," the reporter continued, "that they stay true to their values," Walter said, "that they study, prepare, work hard, but never lose kindness in their hearts, because in the end, what truly matters isn't what was done to you, but how you chose to respond." 2 years after that fateful day at the bank, Walter was invited to be the commencement speaker for a graduating business class. At 72, he stood on stage at one of the country's most prestigious universities. "Dear graduates," Walter said in his speech, "you're receiving your diplomas at an age when I was still cleaning hallways and dreaming of studying. That doesn't diminish me or elevate you. It just proves everyone has their own time and journey. Some of you will lead companies, others will innovate in technology, others will start businesses," he continued. "But all of you will lead people, and leadership is above all serving with humility and treating others with dignity. Always remember, a title may grant authority, but respect is earned through character," Walter concluded. The graduates' ovation lasted over 10 minutes. Many cried, moved by the simplicity and depth of this man's words, who had turned decades of invisibility into a life lesson for the entire country. That evening, during the celebratory dinner, Robert made a special toast. "Dad, 72 years ago you came into this world to teach us that greatness isn't in what you have, but in who you are," Robert said, raising his glass. "Thank you for showing us that true success is when your presence makes the world a better place. And thank you for proving it's never too late to chase dreams," Sarah added, "and that the best revenge against injustice is to build a fairer world." Walter raised his glass with teary eyes. "Thank you for giving me the greatest gift a father could receive," he said. "Children who understand that values matter more than wealth, and that character is worth more than any material achievement." The three raised their glasses, celebrating not just their professional successes, but above all the journey of love, perseverance, and dignity that had brought them to this moment. End of story. Dear listener, what a touching story we've just shared. Walter showed us that age, background, and appearance never determine our true worth. Now we'd love to hear from you. What did you think of this transformation? Leave a comment telling us which part moved you the most. If you've made it this far, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories.